My brother abandoned my 9-year-old daughter at a deserted rest stop at midnight and told her, snitches learn the hard way. Last Friday started as a typical weekend excursion. My brother Philip had offered to drive my daughter, Eloise, back to St. Louis from our family's lake house in the Ozarks. I had to stay behind to fix a burst water pipe that had caused $3,500 in damages to the basement. I handed him her overnight bag at 8 p.m., fully trusting my own flesh and blood. That was the biggest mistake of my life. At exactly 1:14 a.m., I jolted awake to a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a Missouri State Highway Patrol dispatcher. She asked if I was the father of Eloise. My blood ran completely cold. The dispatcher calmly explained that a long-haul trucker had found my daughter sitting on a concrete barrier outside a boarded-up gas station on Route 63, 40 miles from the nearest town. It was pouring rain, and she was crying hysterically in the pitch black. I drove 90 miles an hour down the interstate to the highway patrol. When I arrived, Eloise was wrapped in a thermal blanket, drinking hot cocoa with a female deputy. Once she was calm, the truth came out. On the drive back, Philip had pulled into a crowded diner. While they were eating, Eloise saw Philip's 15-year-old stepson, Beckett, swipe a leather wallet belonging to a blind man sitting at the adjacent booth. Eloise immediately stood up and alerted the staff. The manager confronted Beckett, found the wallet, and threatened to call the cops. Philip managed to talk their way out of it, but he was seething. 10 miles down the highway, Philip pulled over at an abandoned service station. He told Eloise to get out and check if his taillight was broken. The second she stepped onto the wet gravel, he locked the doors, rolled down the window, and told her that snitches learn the hard way. Then he sped off, leaving a 9-year-old completely alone in the dark wilderness, with no phone and no jacket. I didn't even call him. I waited until Monday morning and drove straight to his sleek architectural firm in downtown Clayton. I walked right into his glass-walled office. Philip jumped up, trying to act casual, claiming he had just driven down the road to scare her, and came back 10 minutes later, but she had wandered off. I slammed the police report onto his mahogany desk. I asked him how he could leave a child in the freezing rain to protect a thief. He rolled his eyes, stating Eloise needed to understand family loyalty, and that I was raising a rat. That's when I made my move. I didn't just leave. I walked straight to his firm's HR department. Philip was the lead architect on a $45 million federal courthouse project, a contract that required strict background checks and squeaky clean public records. I handed the director the official child endangerment police report detailing his felony reckless abandonment charge. By noon, Philip was escorted out of the building by security. The firm immediately suspended him without pay to protect their government contract. Yesterday, Philip ambushed me outside my local grocery store. He looked like a shell of a man. His luxury SUV was gone, replaced by a cheap rental. He was practically hyperventilating, explaining that the firm was permanently terminating his $220,000 a year partnership, and the state architecture board was threatening to revoke his license due to the pending felony charges. He begged me to call the district attorney and claim Eloise had run away on her own during a bathroom break. He promised to pay me back for the therapy Eloise is now in. I looked at the man I once called family and felt absolutely nothing. I watched him sweat through his button-down shirt, the fabric sticking to his back in the humid afternoon air. He tried to grab my arm, a desperate, fumbling gesture, and I stepped back so fast he nearly tripped over a stray shopping cart. I told him if he ever came within 10 feet of me or Eloise again, I'd make sure the DA didn't just go for the abandonment charge, but every single detail of the intimidation he used to try and silence a 9-year-old girl. He started screaming then, right there in the parking lot of the Schnucks on Clayton Road. He called me ungrateful. He reminded me how he'd helped me with the down payment on my house 6 years ago, as if a few $1,000s gave him a credit line to traumatize my child. People were staring. A guy loading mulch into his truck paused and put his hand on his phone, looking at me to see if I needed help. I just shook my head and got into my car. When I got home, the house was too quiet. Eloise was in her room. She's been spending a lot of time in her room. She doesn't ask for the iPad or to go to the park anymore. She just sits on her rug and lines up her stuffed animals in a perfect straight row. If one of them falls over, she starts shaking. The phone rang at 6 p.m. It was my mother. I knew it would be. She didn't even say hello. She just started crying, asking why I was trying to destroy the family. She told me that Philip's wife, Sarah, was hysterical because their mortgage payment was due on the 1st and the bank was already calling about the SUV lease. He made a mistake, David, she sobbed. He was stressed. Beckett has been such a handful lately, and Philip just snapped. You can't let him go to prison. You can't let him lose his license. He's worked 20 years for that. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the $3,500 bill from the plumber sitting next to a bowl of half-eaten cereal. I told her, he left your granddaughter in the mud in the middle of the night, Mom. He told her she was a snitch. She's 9. Do you understand that? My mother paused, then said the words that broke whatever was left of our relationship. Well, she shouldn't have embarrassed him in that diner. You know how Philip is about his reputation. I hung up. I didn't block her. Not yet, but I set the phone face down. 2 days later, a process server showed up at my door. I figured Philip was trying to sue me for defamation, which would be hilarious given the police report, but it wasn't that. It was a formal notice of intent from a law firm representing Sarah and Philip. They were filing for an emergency custody intervention regarding Eloise. The paperwork was disgusting. It claimed that my erratic behavior and vindictive nature were creating an unstable environment for my daughter. It used the fact that I'd contacted Philip's HR department as proof that I was more interested in revenge than in the well-being of my child. They were actually trying to argue that Eloise would be safer with her aunt and uncle while I underwent a psychological evaluation. It was a classic Philip move, offensive as a form of defense. He knew he was sinking, so he was trying to pull me under with him. He figured if he could make me look like a lunatic, the child abandonment charge would look like a disgruntled brother making up stories. I called my lawyer, a guy named Marcus who specializes in family law and doesn't take any crap. I sent him a scan of the notice. He called me back 5 minutes later. "David," he said, his voice flat, "they're swinging for the fences here. It's a bullying tactic, but we have to take it seriously. They've listed your mother as a character witness. She signed an affidavit saying she's witnessed you having uncontrollable outbursts of anger in front of the child." My own mother. I felt a physical pain in my chest, like someone had shoved a cold chisel between my ribs. I looked toward the hallway. Eloise was standing there, clutching a worn-out rabbit. She heard me mention her name. "Is Uncle Philip coming back?" she whispered. "No, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "He's not. Good," she said. "I don't like the way he looks at me. He looks at me like I'm a broken toy." I spent the next 3 hours gathering every scrap of evidence I had. I printed out the text messages from Philip the night of the incident, the ones where he didn't reply to my 3 frantic texts asking where they were. I found the receipt from the plumber to prove I was actually at the house. But the real kicker came from an unexpected source. The manager of the diner. I called the diner on Route 63. I remembered the name from the police report, the Silver Skillet. I got the manager, a woman named Martha, on the phone. I told her who I was. "Oh, honey," she said, "I've been wondering about that little girl. Is she okay? That man she was with, he wasn't just mad about the wallet. When they left, I saw him through the window. He didn't just lead her to the car. He grabbed her by the upper arm so hard she winced. I almost went out there myself, but they sped off." "Martha," I said, my heart pounded. "Do you have cameras in the parking lot?" "Yes, sir. We got them for the truckers. They're old, but they work." I drove 3 hours back down to the Ozarks that night. Martha met me at the diner after closing. We sat in the back office, smelling of old grease and floor cleaner, and watched the grainy footage. There was the SUV, there was Beckett, looking shifty, and there was the moment they walked out. Philip didn't just walk Eloise to the car. He shoved her, not a playful nudge, a hard, aggressive shove into the back seat. You could see her head bounce slightly against the frame. Then, the camera caught something else. Philip stayed outside the car for a minute, talking to Beckett. He was pointing toward the highway, laughing. He looked completely composed. He wasn't snapping. He was planning. I got a copy of the footage on a thumb drive. As I was leaving, Martha stopped me. "Wait," she said. "There's one more thing." About 10 minutes after they left, another car pulled in, a white sedan. The boy, the older one who took the wallet, he dropped something in the gravel, a small black pouch. He must have realized it because the sedan circled back. A lady got out, grabbed it, and took off. "A lady?" I asked. "What did she look like?" "Blonde, mid-40s, driving a white Lexus. Sarah, Philip's wife. She wasn't at home hysterical. She was following them. She'd seen the whole thing. She'd seen him leave Eloise at that rest stop, and she'd done absolutely nothing." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just Philip. It was both of them. They were a team, and my daughter was just an obstacle to their perfect family image. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the police station in the town, nearest to the diner. I sat there in the lobby at 3 a.m. until a sergeant could see me. I showed him the footage and told him about the white Lexus. The sergeant looked at the screen, then at me. If his wife was following him and saw him leave a minor on the side of the road and didn't call 911, that's conspiracy to commit child endangerment. At the very least, it's failure to report. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction, but it was hollow. My family was a crime scene. The next morning, I was back in Clayton. I didn't go to the firm this time. I went to the courthouse. My lawyer met me there. We filed a countersuit, but we also filed for a permanent restraining order against Philip, Sarah, and my mother. When my mother found out, she called me 42 times in 2 hours. I finally picked up on the 43rd. "How could you?" she screamed. "The police showed up at Sarah's house. They're questioning her." "David, stop this madness." "I have the video, Mom," I said. "I saw Sarah. She was right behind them. She watched him dump Eloise in the rain, and she just kept driving. Did you know about that?" Silence. A long, heavy silence. She said they were just going to teach her a lesson," my mother whispered. "She said they were going to go back for her in 20 minutes. They just wanted her to be scared enough to keep her mouth shut." 20 minutes? I felt my voice rising. "The police found her over an hour later, 40 miles away. They didn't go back, Mom. They went home." Philip said. "I don't care what Philip said. He's a monster, and you're his accomplice." I hung up and blocked her. Truly blocked her this time. A week later, the architectural firm sent out a formal press release. They were officially severing all ties with Philip. They'd done their own internal audit after I'd dropped the bomb, and they found irregularities in his billing on the courthouse project. Apparently, Philip had been padding his house to cover the payments on that luxury SUV and Sarah's country club membership. He wasn't just a child abuser. He was a thief, just like his stepson. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought we could start to heal. But then, yesterday afternoon, a man I didn't recognize knocked on my door. He was wearing a cheap suit and carrying a briefcase. "Mr. Miller?" he asked. "I'm representing the estate of your late father. My father had died 10 years ago. He'd left everything to my mother, with the understanding that the house and his savings would eventually be split between Philip and me." "What about it?" I asked. "Your mother has initiated a transfer of the entire family estate, the lake house, the investment accounts, and her primary residence, into a private trust," the man said. "The sole beneficiary of that trust is Beckett, Philip's stepson." I stared at him. "Beckett? The kid isn't even blood related." "The trust has a specific clause," the lawyer continued, looking uncomfortable. company. It states that the funds are to be used for Beckett's legal defense and future education, and that should you attempt to contest it, a pre-recorded statement from your mother regarding your history of mental instability will be released to the court. My mother was weaponizing my father's life work to protect the boy who started this whole thing, all to spite you for holding Philip accountable. She was willing to go broke and leave me with nothing just to make sure the snitch didn't win. I closed the door on the lawyer. I walked into the kitchen and saw Eloise. She was standing at the table, looking at a picture of us from the lake house last summer. "Dad," she asked, "why is Grandma so mad at us?" I looked at her, at the bruises on her spirit that might never fully fade, and I realized that the fight wasn't even close to being over. Philip was down, but the rest of them were digging in. I picked up the phone and called Marcus. "They're trying to move the assets," I said. "Every penny, and my mother is threatening to lie under oath to make it happen." "Okay," Marcus said. "Then we stopped playing nice. Did you tell me Philip was the lead on that courthouse project?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Because if there are billing irregularities on a $45 million federal contract, that's not just an HR issue, David. That's a federal crime. And if your mother is funding his defense with assets that were supposed to be protected by your father's original will, we might have a way to freeze everything." He paused. "But you have to be ready, David. Once we trigger a federal inquiry, there's no going back. Philip will go to prison, not just for the abandonment, for the fraud, and your mother will likely lose the house." I looked at Eloise. She was trying to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do it," I said. Marcus exhaled, a long static-filled sound through the phone. "I'll make the calls. It's going to take a few days for the gears to start grinding, but once they catch, it's going to be a bloodbath. Protect yourself, David. Document every call, every text, every time someone so much as looks at you funny at the grocery store." I hung up and put my phone in my pocket. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer, exhausting weight of what my life had become in less than 2 weeks. I looked back at Eloise. She had moved from the picture frame to the living room window, pressing her forehead against the glass, watching the neighbor's golden retriever chase a tennis ball in the fading light. "Everything is going to be fine, Elle," I said, walking over and resting a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She just kept watching the dog. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. True to Marcus's warning, the silence from Philip was deafening. No texts, no angry voicemails, no process servers knocking on my door, but I could feel the pressure building, like the heavy, oppressive air right before a Midwestern tornado. I spent Tuesday morning at the bank, pulling together the funds for Marcus's retainer, $5,000. Between that and the plumber's bill for the basement, my savings account was completely wiped out. I had to put the groceries on a credit card that afternoon. I stood in the checkout line, staring at the terminal, holding my breath until it beeped approved. Philip was out there patting in federal contracts to pay for country clubs, and I was sweating over $80 worth of chicken breasts, frozen waffles, and mac and cheese. On Wednesday, I took Eloise to her second session with Dr. Aris, a child psychologist recommended by the school counselor. Her office was in a boring beige medical park off the interstate. While Eloise was in the back room playing with kinetic sand, Dr. Aris pulled me into her side office. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, wearing silver wire-rimmed glasses and a cardigan that looked like it had been washed 100 times. She didn't mince words. "Eloise is exhibiting classic signs of acute stress disorder," Dr. Aris said, folding her hands on her desk. "She's hypervigilant. She's startled when the HVAC kicked on, and she's internalizing the blame." "The blame?" I asked, feeling my stomach twist. "She didn't do anything wrong. She told the truth." "I know that, and you know that," Dr. Aris said gently. "But to a 9-year-old, the narrative is different. She spoke up, and the immediate result was being abandoned in the dark by a trusted authority figure. Now her family is fracturing. Her grandmother isn't calling. Her uncle is gone. In her mind, the equation is simple. I told the truth, and I broke my family." I felt a hot, familiar spike of rage toward Philip, but I pushed it down. "How do I fix it?" "Routine," she replied. "Absolute, ironclad routine. Make her world small, predictable, and safe, and keep her entirely insulated from the legal proceedings. No phone calls about lawyers while she's in the house. No venting to friends where she can overhear." I nodded, feeling a sharp pang of guilt for the conversation with Marcus she'd overheard just days prior. I promised to do better. By Thursday, Marcus's wheels had started turning. He didn't tell me exactly who he called or what forms he filed, but I knew the exact moment the domino fell. It was 2:15 p.m. I was at my desk at the logistics company where I work as a routing manager, trying to figure out why 3 of our trucks were stalled in Indianapolis. My cell phone started vibrating on the desk. It was my Aunt Cheryl, my mother's younger sister. I hadn't spoken to Cheryl since Thanksgiving. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, Uncle Bob called. Then my cousin Greg. Then an unknown number. I answered that one. "David Miller?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking. This is Joanne from Commerce Bank. I'm trying to reach your mother, but her primary number is going straight to voicemail. I'm her designated private wealth manager. Because you are listed as the secondary on her legacy checking account, I am required to inform you that a federal hold has been placed on all assets tied to her social security number." I leaned back in my cheap mesh office chair. "A federal hold?" "Yes, sir. This includes the primary residence and the trust currently in processing. We received a notice of injunction related to a pending federal fraud investigation involving a third party attempting to receive funds. Until the source of the third party's income is audited, everything is frozen." "I understand," I said. My voice was perfectly steady. "Thank you for letting me know, Joanne." I hung up. They had tried to hide the money, and Marcus had dropped a nuclear bomb on the transfer. My mother couldn't move a dime to Beckett, and Philip couldn't touch a cent of my father's estate for his defense. 10 minutes later, the text messages started flooding in. Not from my mother. She was was probably locked in a room with her lawyer, but from Sarah. You sick bastard. You're destroying an old woman. She can't even buy her blood pressure medication. I hope you're happy. We are coming for full custody. You are mentally unfit. I took a screenshot of every single message, emailed them to Marcus, and then blocked her number. I left work early to pick up Eloise from school. I wanted to be there exactly when the bell rang. Routine. Small, predictable, safe. I parked in the pickup line and waited. The kids started streaming out of the double glass doors, a sea of oversized backpacks and brightly colored jackets. I saw Eloise walk out. She was walking next to her friend Maya, but she wasn't talking. She was looking at the ground. Then I saw him, Beckett. He didn't go to this school. His high school was 3 miles away. But there he was, standing near the bike racks, wearing a black hoodie and looking at his phone. He looked up, scanned the crowd of elementary kids, and locked eyes on Eloise. He pushed off the bike rack and started walking toward her. He wasn't rushing, just moving with that arrogant, slouched gait teenagers have when they think they own the pavement. I didn't think. I threw the car into park, leaving it running in the middle of the pickup line, and sprinted across the blacktop. Eloise, I yelled. She looked up. Beckett was about 10 feet away from her now. He stopped when he heard my voice. I reached her, stepping smoothly between her and Beckett. I grabbed her hand. It was ice cold. Get in the car, Elle, I said, my eyes fixed entirely on Beckett. Dad, what's Eloise? She didn't argue. She turned, jogged to the idling car. I stood there, facing down a 15-year-old kid who had started this entire nightmare over a stolen wallet. Up close, he didn't look like a criminal mastermind. He looked like a kid with bad skin and too much expensive cologne, but the look in his eyes wasn't innocent. It was pure, entitled malice. What do you want, Beckett? I asked, keeping my voice low. Parents were staring. I didn't care. He smirked, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pockets. Just visiting, seeing my favorite cousin. If you ever come within 50 yards of her again, I will have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. And I know the cops in this town are already very familiar with your name. The smirk faltered for a second, a flash of genuine panic crossing his face, but he quickly covered it up with a sneer. You're crazy, you know that? That's what Grandma says. She says you're losing your mind because you're broke. Tell your stepdad he left a trail on those invoices, I said softly. Beckett's eyes widened. He didn't know what that meant, not the specifics, but he knew it was a threat. He took a step back. I'm just waiting for a friend, he muttered, looking away. Wait somewhere else. I turned my back on him, which took every ounce of willpower I had, and walked back to my car. Horns were honking behind me in the pickup line. I got in, checked to make sure Eloise's seatbelt was fastened, and drove away. What did Beckett want? She asked from the back seat, her voice tight. He was just passing by, honey. He won't be back. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was an email from Marcus. The subject line was just 2 words. Mediation date. I opened it at the next red light. The family court judge had reviewed the emergency custody intervention filed by Philip and Sarah because of the severity of the allegations. Abandonment on one side, mental instability on the other. The judge wasn't tossing it out immediately. He was forcing a mandatory mediation session next Tuesday. If we couldn't resolve it there, it would go to a full hearing, complete with Child Protective Services, interviewing Eloise. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They were going to drag her into a sterile room and make her recount the worst night of her life, just to save their own skins. When we got home, the mail was sitting on the kitchen counter. Mostly junk, a bill from the electric company, and a thick manila envelope with no return address. I waited until Eloise was settled in her room with a snack before I opened it. Inside was a stack of paper, bound with a binder clip. I flipped to the first page. It was a copy of my own medical records from 7 years ago. When Eloise's mother, my ex-wife, left us, I had a brief, severe bout of depression. I lost 20 pounds. I couldn't sleep. I voluntarily checked myself into a clinic for 4 days to adjust my medication and get my head straight so I could be a good father to my then 2-year-old daughter. I did the responsible thing. I got help. Someone had highlighted the words, severe depressive episode, and inpatient treatment in bright yellow marker. Attached to the front was a handwritten sticky note. See you on Tuesday, David. We think Eloise needs a stable home. It wasn't Philip's handwriting. It wasn't Sarah's either. It was my mother's. Marcus didn't hesitate. Done. I'm filing the injunction on the estate transfer first thing tomorrow morning, and I'm making the call to the Inspector General's office for the federal contract. Get some sleep, David. The weekend is going to be quiet, but Tuesday is going to be a night fight. He hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at my mother's handwriting on that sticky note. 7 years ago, when I was sitting in that clinic feeling like my chest was caving in, she visited me. She brought me a thermos of chicken soup and held my hand. She told me I was doing the right thing for my daughter. Now she was using that exact moment to try and take my daughter away. I took the medical file, the sticky note, and the envelope, walked out to the backyard, and dropped them into the rusted metal fire pit near the patio. I lit a match and watched my darkest days turn to ash. The weekend was exactly as Marcus predicted, eerily quiet. I tried to build that wall of routine Dr. Aris talked about. On Saturday, Eloise and I made pancakes from scratch. We watched a nature documentary. We went to the hardware store to buy a new filter for the furnace. I kept my phone on silent, checking it only when I went to the bathroom. No missed calls, no texts. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like holding your breath underwater. Monday afternoon, I took a half day from work to sit in Marcus's office and prep for the mediation. His office smelled like stale coffee and leather cleaner. He sat across across from me, a thick file open on his desk. Mediation is not a trial, Marcus explained, leaning back. It's a negotiation in front of a neutral third party. The mediator has no power to issue an order. Their job is to see if we can reach an agreement without clogging up the court's docket. Philip's lawyer, a guy named Vance, is going to use this space to rattle you. They want you to get angry. They want you to yell, to bang the table, to act erratic, so they can point to you and say, "See, he's unhinged." I'm not going to yell, I said. You say that now, Marcus warned. Wait until they start twisting your life into a pretzel right in front of you. You look at me, David, not at them. You let me do the talking. Tuesday morning, 8:45 a.m., the St. Louis County Courthouse in Clayton. I walked through the metal detectors, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wore a charcoal suit I hadn't put on since a friend's funeral 3 years ago. The collar felt too tight. Marcus met me near the elevators, and we rode up to the 4th floor in silence. The mediation rooms were just a series of small, windowless conference rooms, branching off a long, beige hallway. When we walked into room 4B, they were already there. Philip looked awful. He was wearing a suit that probably cost $3,000, but it hung off him like he'd shrunk. The bags under his eyes were bruised and purple. Sarah sat next to him, her posture rigid, her face locked in a tight, venomous mask. And then there was my mother. She sat at the far end of the table. When I walked in, she looked down at her hands, refusing to meet my eyes. She had her pearl necklace on, the one my dad bought her for their 30th anniversary. Seeing her wearing it while trying to destroy me made my stomach churn. The mediator was an older guy with a gray beard and tired eyes named Mr. Gable. He laid out the ground rules. No interrupting, keep it civil, focus on the child. Vance, Philip's lawyer, didn't waste a second. He was a slick guy with hair gelled straight back and a voice like oiled gravel. He opened a manila folder and pulled out the medical records, the exact same ones my mother had mailed to my house. Mr. Gable, Vance started, his tone oozing fake concern. We are here because my clients have deep documented concerns about David Miller's mental stability. 7 years ago, he was institutionalized for severe depression. Recent events, specifically a campaign of vindictive, retaliatory behavior against his brother, indicate a severe relapse. He is lashing out. He is trying to sever the child's ties with her loving extended family. This is an unstable environment for a 9-year-old girl. I dug my fingernails into my thighs under the table. I stared at the wood grain. I didn't look at Philip. Marcus cleared his throat. Mr. Gable, opposing counsel is weaponizing a voluntary brief medical stay from nearly a decade ago. Since then, my client has maintained steady employment, primary residence, and full, unblemished custody of his daughter. The only retaliatory behavior my client has engaged in was reporting a verified felony. Philip Miller abandoned a 9-year-old child at a closed gas station at 1 in the morning. We have police records. We have video evidence. This custody petition is nothing more than witness intimidation wrapped in family law. Video evidence of a brief disciplinary misjudgment. Vance shot back smoothly. A mistake my client deeply regrets and has apologized for. But David Miller's reaction has been completely disproportionate. He is attempting to bankrupt his own mother to fund a personal vendetta. He froze the assets because your client is currently under federal investigation for fraud, Marcus said flatly. The room went dead silent. Mr. Gable blinked, looking from Marcus to Vance. Philip's face rained at what little color it had. Sarah let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. My mother finally looked up, her eyes wide and panicked. They hadn't known about the federal audit yet. Marcus had timed the drop perfectly. That is a baseless accusation, Vance stammered, recovering quickly, though his voice had lost its smooth edge, and entirely irrelevant to family court. It's highly relevant to the character and stability of the household proposing to take over, Marcus countered. I thought we had to. I thought Vance was going to pack up his briefcase and advise his clients to drop the petition. But Vance just took a slow breath, reached into his leather bag, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. We anticipated Mr. Miller would try to deflect with administrative drama, Vance said, which is why we felt it necessary to seek an outside perspective, someone who knows David's parenting intimately, but is removed from the current family dispute. He slid the paper across the table to the mediator. Then he handed a copy to Marcus. I leaned over to look at it. My vision blurred for a second as I read the name at the top of the sworn affidavit. Jessica Miller, my ex-wife, Eloise's mother. Jessica walked out on us when Eloise was 2. She moved to Florida, started a new life, and barely bothered to call on birthdays. I hadn't spoken to her for 3 years. She hadn't paid a dime in child support, and I hadn't gone after her for it, just wanting her out of our lives so I could raise my daughter in peace. What is this? I asked, my voice cracking despite my promise to Marcus. It's a sworn, notarized affidavit from the child's biological mother, Vance said, looking right at me. Signed in Tampa 2 days ago. Marcus was scanning the document, his jaw tight. David, don't speak. Read it, Mr. Gable, Vance urged. Gable adjusted his glasses and read aloud. During our marriage, David exhibited frightening mood swings and an inability to handle stress. I have recently been made aware of the escalating conflict within his family. Based on my past experience with his erratic temperament, I do not believe he is fit to maintain sole custody during this crisis. I fully support Philip and Sarah Miller assuming emergency guardianship of Eloise until David undergoes a comprehensive psychological evaluation. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was shrinking. They had bought her. They must have found Jessica, wired her money to pay off whatever debt she was drowning in down in Florida, and had her sign a piece of paper that could destroy my life. She hasn't seen Eloise in 7 years, I snapped, half standing out of my chair. She doesn't even know what grade she's in. Sit down, David, Marcus ordered, pulling my arm. She abandoned her, I yelled, pointing at Philip. Just like he did. See? Sarah whispered loudly across the table. Look at him. He's completely out of control. I forced myself back into the chair, my chest heaving. I looked at my mother. She was staring down at her hands again. She knew Jessica was a deadbeat. She knew how much damage Jessica had done to me, and she had sat back and let Philip lie her testimony. Mr. Gable sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at the affidavit, then at the police report Marcus had provided, and finally at me. Gentlemen, Gable said, his voice heavy with bureaucratic exhaustion. This is a mess. We have an abandonment charge on one side, and now an affidavit from the biological mother, contesting the father's fitness on the other. I cannot, in good conscience, recommend that the judge dismiss this intervention today. Mr. Gable, that affidavit is purchased testimony, Marcus argued. Then you can prove that in court, Gable said. But for now, it's a sworn legal document. This mediation is at an impasse. He looked at me, his expression softening just a fraction, but his words were devastating. I am going to recommend to the judge that a guardian ad litem be appointed for the child immediately, and I am legally obligated to request a home study. A home study. What does that mean? I asked Marcus, my voice hollow. Marcus didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on Gable. It means Child Protective Services is going to get involved, David. They're going to come to your house, and they are going to interview Eloise. I looked across the table. Philip was staring at me. The panic over the federal audit was still in his eyes, but a sick, triumphant smirk was pulling at the corner of his mouth. He had just dragged a 9-year-old girl into the system. He was going to force the niece he abandoned in the dark to sit in a room with a state worker and be questioned about whether her father was crazy, all to save his own skin. We're done here, Marcus said, snapping his briefcase shut. He stood up. Vance, you tell your client he'd better hold on tight, because the family court might move slow, but the federal government doesn't. I stood up. I didn't look at Philip or Sarah. I walked around the table and stopped right behind my mother's chair. I leaned down, lowering my voice so only she could hear it. When CPS comes to talk to Eloise, I whispered, I'm going to let them ask whatever they want, and then I'm going to tell her exactly who sent her. She will never look at you again as long as you live. My mother flinched, her shoulders drawing up to her ears, a small choked sob catching in her throat. I walked out of the room, leaving her crying at the table. The drive home was a blur. Marcus called me twice, but I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to strategize. I didn't want to talk about injunctions or affidavits. I just wanted to get to my house before the school bus dropped Eloise off. I beat the bus by 20 minutes. I unlocked the front door, the silence of the empty house pressing in on me. I walked into the living room and saw the perfect, straight line of stuffed animals lined up against the baseboard. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't Marcus. It was the school. Mr. Miller? It was the school nurse. I'm sorry to bother you, but Eloise isn't on the bus. She's in my office. My blood turned to ice. What happened? Is she hurt? She's physically fine, the nurse said carefully. But there was an incident on the playground during afternoon recess. Another student said something to her, and Eloise, she became completely unresponsive. We had to carry her inside. She's just sitting on the cot. She won't speak to me, and she won't look at anyone. I'm on my way. I broke 3 traffic laws getting to the elementary school. I sprinted through the front doors, bypassing the sign-in sheet, and practically kicked the door to the nurse's office open. Eloise was sitting on the edge of the examination cot. She was hugging her knees to her chest, her eyes fixed blankly on the tiled floor. I said, dropping to my knees in front of her. I'm here. Dad's here. She didn't blink. She didn't move. The principal, a tall woman named Mrs. Higgins, stepped into the doorway. Mr. Miller, can I speak with you in the hall for a moment? I looked at Eloise, touched her knee gently, and stood up. I followed Mrs. Higgins out into the brightly lit corridor. What happened? I demanded. Who said something to her? Mrs. Higgins crossed her arms, looking deeply uncomfortable. It was an older boy. He doesn't go to this school. He hopped the chain-link fence by the oak trees during recess. The recess monitors didn't see him until it was too late. Beckett, I growled, my hands balling into fists. It was Beckett, wasn't it? I don't know his name, Mrs. Higgins said, but several of the 4th graders heard what he said to her before he ran off. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. What did he say? Mrs. Higgins hesitated, looking back toward the nurse's office. He walked right up to her and said, your dad is going away, and you're coming to live with us. And if you cry, I'm going to leave you in the woods again. My vision tunneled. The brightly lit elementary school hallway seemed to narrow, the cheerful bulletin boards blurring into meaningless colors. I looked at Mrs. Higgins. She was wringing her hands, the polished school administrator facade completely crumbling under the weight of what had just happened on her watch. You let him on the property, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Mr. Miller, we have 3 monitors for 200 kids. I don't care, I interrupted. I am going to the police station right now to file a report for trespassing and harassment against a minor, and if that kid ever gets within 100 yards of this building again, I will hold this school district legally liable for failing to protect my daughter. Do you understand me? She nodded quickly, her face pale. I'll instruct the staff. We'll lock the perimeter gates during recess. I turned away from her and walked back into the nurse's office. Eloise was exactly where I'd left her, a small frozen statue on the crinkling paper of the exam cot. I didn't ask her what happened. I didn't ask her to explain. She was 9 years old and getting too tall to carry like a toddler, but I didn't care. I scooped her up into my arms. She felt so light, completely hollowed out. She immediately buried her face in my neck, her small hands grabbing the fabric of my suit jacket in a death grip. I carried her out to the car. I buckled her in. I didn't drive straight home. I drove to the nearest police precinct and spent 2 hours sitting in a sterile room with a patrol officer, filing the report. I gave them Beckett's name, his high school, and Philip's address. When we finally got back to the house, I made Eloise a cup of hot chocolate. I set her up on the couch with a blanket and turned on a cartoon. I watched her for a few minutes. She wasn't watching the screen. She was just staring through it. I walked out to the back porch and called Marcus. When I told him what Beckett had said, the line went dead silent for a long time. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was stripped of all its usual lawyerly detachment. It was pure, icy anger. "That is witness intimidation," Marcus said. "He threatened a minor to coerce a change in testimony, and given that it involves an ongoing federal investigation into his stepfather's firm, that pushes it out of family court and into criminal territory. I am calling the DA's office right now. Can they arrest him? He's 15. They can absolutely detain him," Marcus said. "But David, you need to listen to me very carefully. The school is legally mandated to report that incident to Child Protective Services. Because there is already an open custody dispute citing an unstable environment, this is going to trigger an emergency home study. They won't wait for the court order. They'll be at your house within 48 hours. I looked through the sliding glass door at Eloise on the couch. "What do I do? You cooperate. You let them in. You answer their questions. You do not lose your temper. They are going to look for any excuse to validate the claims in your ex-wife's affidavit. Your house needs to be spotless. Your fridge needs to be full. And you need to prepare Eloise. Prepare her how? She's traumatized, Marcus. She's barely speaking." "I know," he said softly, "but they are going to insist on interviewing her alone. If you refuse, they will label you uncooperative, and it will go in their report. You have to let them talk to her." I hung up the phone and leaned against the cold siding of my house. I felt like I was drowning. Every time I managed to get my head above water, Philip and my mother found a new way to push me back under. I spent the next 24 hours scrubbing my house like a madman. I bleached the bathrooms. I organized the pantry. I made sure every single piece of Eloise's clothing was washed, folded, and put away. I threw away the half-empty bottles of beer in the back of the fridge. I wanted this house to look like a sterile, impenetrable fortress of good parenting. The knock came on Thursday at 4:30 p.m. I opened the door to find a woman in a beige trench coat standing on my porch. She held a thick leather binder. She looked overworked, her eyes tired, and her hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun. "Mr. Miller, I'm Ms. Gallagher with the Department of Family Services. I'm here regarding the emergency order filed in family court." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked in and immediately started scanning. She looked at the floors, the walls, the furniture. She asked to see the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator and the pantry, making small check marks on a form inside her binder. She asked to see Eloise's room. I walked her upstairs. She noted the bed, the window locks, and the perfect rigid line of stuffed animals against the baseboard. She paused at that, her pen hovering over the paper. Dr. Aris, her child psychologist, noted that she's using organization as a coping mechanism for acute stress. I said quickly, trying to preempt whatever she was writing down. Miss Gallagher didn't respond. She just made a note. We went back downstairs. Eloise was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring in a book. She didn't look up when we entered the room. "Hello, Eloise," Miss Gallagher said, her voice dropping into that specific gentle tone adults use when they're trying not to spook a child. "I'm Miss Gallagher. I just want to talk to you for a little bit." Eloise kept coloring. Miss Gallagher turned to me. "Mr. Miller, I need to speak with your daughter privately. The living room will be fine." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to say no, to tell this stranger to get out of my house and leave my daughter alone. But I remembered Marcus's warning. I nodded, my throat tight. "Okay, honey, I'm going to be right here in the kitchen. Miss Gallagher is just going to ask you a few questions." Eloise finally looked up. Her eyes were wide and terrified. She looked from me to the social worker, then back to me. She slowly slid off her chair and walked into the living room, clutching a green crayon in her fist. Miss Gallagher followed her and pulled the pocket doors shut, leaving them open just an inch. I stood in the kitchen for 25 minutes. It was the longest 25 minutes of my life. I couldn't hear the exact words being spoken, just the low, steady murmur of Miss Gallagher's voice and the occasional, barely audible whisper from Eloise. I paced between the sink and the stove, staring at the grain of the hardwood floor, imagining every possible way they could twist this against me. Finally, the pocket door slid open. Miss Gallagher walked out. Her expression was completely unreadable. Eloise stayed on the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Miss Gallagher said, closing her binder. "I think I have what I need for now." I walked her to the front door. I tried to read her face, to find some sign that she saw through the lies, that she knew I was just a father trying to protect his kid from a family of sociopaths. "Miss Gallagher," I said as she stepped onto the porch, "please, you have to understand what's happening here. They are under a federal investigation. My brother is facing felony charges. This custody petition is retaliation." She stopped and turned back to me. She looked at me for a long, quiet moment. "Mr. Miller," she said carefully, "my primary concern is the emotional and physical safety of the child. I review the court filings, the medical records, and the interviews. I don't litigate fraud, but the context matters," I pleaded. "Context always matters," she agreed, "which is why I find it concerning that your mother contacted our office directly this morning." I froze. "My mother called you?" "She called the department supervisor," Ms. Gallagher corrected. "She stated that she has serious concerns about your current financial stability. She claimed that you recently depleted your savings to hire an aggressive attorney, that you are putting basic necessities on credit cards, and that you told her you might lose the house, the $3,500 plumber's bill, the $5,000 retainer for Marcus. I had put the groceries on the card, Joanne from the bank. My mother had leveraged the freeze on the estate to monitor my accounts, or Joanne had violated confidentiality. Either way, my mother was building a narrative that I was financially destitute and mentally unraveled. She also claimed," Miss Gallagher continued, her voice voice devoid of judgment but heavy with implication, that you have been repeatedly coaching Eloise on what to say about the night at the rest stop. Your mother stated that you told Eloise if she didn't stick to the story that your brother abandoned her, you would be sent back to the psychiatric hospital. The air rushed out of my lungs. It was a lie so venomous, so perfectly engineered to destroy me, that I physically stumbled back a half step. She was using my past depression to tell the state that I was emotionally holding my daughter hostage. That is a lie, I said, my voice shaking. I have never said that. I would never say that to her. I asked Elle about it, Ms. Gallagher said flatly. My heart stopped. And what did she say? She started crying uncontrollably and refused to answer, Ms. Gallagher replied. She just kept asking if you were going to be taken away. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine doubt in the social worker's eyes. Not doubt about my mother's claims, doubt about me. I will be submitting my initial report to the Guardian ad litem on Monday, Mr. Miller. Good evening. She walked down the steps and got into her sedan. I stood on the porch, watching her taillights disappear down the street, the damp evening air settling over my skin like a wet shroud. They had done it. They had actually managed to plant the seed into Sustain's mind that I was the abuser. I walked back inside and locked the door. I went into the living room. Eloise was still on the couch. She had the green crayon in her hand, but it was snapped in half. I sat down next to her. I didn't try to hug her. I just sat there. Did that lady ask you about Grandma? Eloise whispered. Yeah, she did, I said softly. I didn't tell her, Eloise said, her voice cracking. I didn't tell her what Grandma said on the phone. I turned my head to look at her. What do you mean? When did Grandma talk to you on the phone? Eloise looked down at the broken crayon. On Tuesday, when you were at the lawyer's office. You left your iPad on the kitchen counter. It rang. It was Grandma. My chest tightened. My iPad was linked to my phone's iCloud. I had blocked my mother's number on my phone, but the call had pushed through the Wi-Fi to the tablet while I was out of the house. What did she say to you, Elle? A tear spilled over Eloise's lower lash line and cut a clean track down her cheek. She said that Uncle Philip was very sorry, and she said that if I just told the lady today that I got out of the car by myself and got lost, everything would go back to normal. She took a shaky breath, her small shoulders hitching. She said that if I didn't tell them that, then it would be my fault if you lost all your money and had to go live somewhere else. She said I was being a bad girl for breaking up the family. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. The rage that hit me was so absolute, so freezing cold, that it stripped away every other emotion in my body. I just looked at my daughter, sitting on the couch with a broken crayon, completely crushed under the weight of an adult's cruelty. I reached out and pulled her against my chest. She was shaking. I wrapped my arms around her and pressed my chin to the top of her head. Listen to me, I said, my voice barely a whisper but completely firm. You did nothing wrong. You told the truth. Uncle Philip did a bad thing, and Grandma is lying to cover it up. You are the bravest person I know, and nobody is taking you away from me. Nobody. Do you hear me? She nodded against my shirt, her small fingers curling into the fabric. We sat there for a long time, until her breathing slowed down and the shaking stopped. Once she was settled and watching her cartoon again, I walked into the kitchen. I looked at the island counter where I usually left my iPad. Then I looked up. Sitting on top of the kitchen cabinets, tucked next to a decorative ceramic jug, was a small, square-wise security camera. I'd bought it 3 years ago when we had an elderly golden retriever, just to keep an eye on him while I was at work. The dog had passed away last spring, but I never took the camera down. It was plugged into the wall, recording on a continuous loop to a micro SD card. I pulled a step stool over, climbed up, and grabbed the camera. My hands were trembling as I popped the tiny plastic card out of the slot. I carried it over to my laptop on the dining table, slid it into the adapter, and opened the files. I scrolled back to Tuesday. I found the timestamp for 10:15 a.m., the exact window I had been sitting in the mediation room with Marcus, Mr. Gable, and my family. I clicked play. The video showed the empty kitchen. Then, the iPad on the counter lit up, the generic ringtone echoing in the quiet house. A few seconds later, Eloise walked into the frame. She was wearing her oversized yellow sweater. She looked at the screen, hesitated, and then tapped the answer button. Because it was a FaceTime audio call, it automatically defaulted to the iPad's external speaker. The audio on the camera was grainy, but the kitchen acoustics amplified it perfectly. I heard it. I heard my mother's voice. Eloise, sweetheart, it's Grandma. Hi, Grandma, Eloise said softly. Listen to me very carefully, honey. I know you talked to some police officers about the other night, but Uncle Philip is very sorry. He made a silly mistake. When the lady comes to talk to you this week, you need to tell her that you opened the door yourself and got out while he wasn't looking. I watched my daughter shrink back from the counter on the video, but I didn't. He locked the doors and told me. Eloise, my mother's voice cut in, sharp and impatient, stripping away the fake sweetness. Do you want your father to lose his house? Do you want him to have to go away again because he can't handle the stress? Because that's what's going to happen. You're breaking up the family. If you don't fix this, it's all your fault. On the screen, Eloise started crying. She reached out with a trembling finger and ended the call. Then she ran out of the frame. I sat at the table and stared at the frozen video player. My own mother. She had calculated the exact time I would be locked in a mediation room without my phone, knowing Eloise would be home with the sitter in the living room, and she had called my iPad to terrorize a 9-year-old. I saved the file. I backed it up to my hard drive, emailed a copy to myself, and then attached it to a direct email to Marcus. I didn't write a long message. I just typed, listen to the audio. This is what she did while we were in your office. The social worker was here today. They used this call to make Eloise Eloise break down in front of her. My phone rang less than 5 minutes later. Marcus didn't even say hello. I have it, he said, his voice clipped and hard. I'm downloading it to a secure server right now. David, this changes everything. This isn't just a family court dispute anymore. This is witness tampering and child endangerment. I am bypassing the social worker entirely. I'm taking this directly to the guardian ad litem and the judge first thing tomorrow morning. I asked, looking toward the living room where Eloise was finally dozing on the couch. I'm getting a temporary protective order against your mother by noon tomorrow, Marcus promised. She won't be allowed within 500 feet of your daughter or your property. If she tries to call, she violates the order and goes to jail. But David, you need to brace yourself. Cornered animals fight. When the judge sees this, the emergency custody petition is going to implode, and Philip will know he's out of options. I'm ready, I said. I spent Friday keeping Eloise home from school. I couldn't risk Beckett jumping another fence, and I couldn't risk the social worker showing up unannounced at the principal's office. We stayed inside. We baked cookies. We played board games. Every time a car drove past the house, my muscles coiled tight, waiting for a knock at the door. At 1:30 p.m., Marcus texted me a PDF document. It was stamped by the St. Louis County Court, a temporary protective order against my mother, effective immediately. The judge had heard the audio. I exhaled a breath. I felt like I'd been holding for a week. We had a shield. Saturday morning dawned gray and overcast. It was supposed to rain all weekend. I was in the kitchen, pouring a second cup of coffee, when I heard the sound of tires crunching on the wet leaves at the end of my driveway. I set the mug down and walked to the front window. It wasn't a police cruiser. It wasn't my mother's Buick. It was a black town car, the kind you rent from the airport. It parked at the curb. The driver, a guy in a windbreaker, got out and opened the back door. A woman stepped out onto the sidewalk. She was wearing a beige trench coat over a silk blouse, her dark hair cut into a sharp, expensive-looking bob. She held a designer leather tote bag over one shoulder. She paused, looking up at the house, her eyes scanning the peeling paint on the porch railing and the slightly overgrown bushes near the steps. My stomach plummeted. The coffee turned to acid in my throat. It was Jessica. She hadn't just signed an affidavit in Florida. She had flown to Missouri. I didn't wait for her to ring the bell. I didn't want Eloise to hear the chime. I unlocked the front door, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled the door shut behind me until it clicked. The damp morning air hit my face, but I didn't feel the cold. Jessica walked up the driveway, her heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Up close, the 7 years were visible. There were fine lines around her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there when she walked out on us. But she looked polished, groomed, paid for. Hello, David, her voice was exactly the same, slightly raspy, perfectly measured. You have exactly 10 seconds to get back in that car before I call the police, I said. She let out a small, tired sigh, adjusting her grip on the leather tote. Don't be dramatic. I have a legal right to be here. I'm her mother. You lost the right to use that word when you packed your bags while she was asleep and blocked my number. I shot back, gripping the porch railing so hard my joints ached. You don't exist to her. You are a ghost. Why are you here? Philip called me, she said, completely unapologetic. He explained the situation. He bought you, I corrected her. How much did it cost? 10 grand? 20? Did he clear your credit card debt, Jess? Because we both know you wouldn't cross the street for your daughter, let alone cross the country, unless there was a check attached to it. Her jaw tightened. I heard you had a breakdown. I read the medical file. You were in a psych ward, David. Because you left us, I yelled, stepping forward, the anger finally spilling over the edge. I checked myself into a clinic for 4 days because I couldn't eat or sleep, and I needed to be okay for my child, the child you abandoned. And now you're alienating her from her family, Jessica said smoothly, reciting the lines Vance had clearly drilled into her. Your brother made a mistake, and you're trying to send him to prison. You froze your own mother's assets. You're unstable, David. You're lashing out at everyone. Get off my property. She didn't move. I came to see Eloise. I brought her a gift. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a small wrapped box with a silver ribbon. It looked completely generic, like something grabbed from an airport gift shop on the way to the gate. She doesn't want your gift, I said. She doesn't know who you are. The last time you saw her, she was wearing diapers. Now turn around and leave. Jessica looked at me, a cold, calculating light in her eyes. You can't keep me away from her. The guardian ad litem has already been appointed. Her name is Miss Sterling. She's scheduling a joint interview for Monday, and I'm going to be there. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. You have no custody rights. You abandoned the marital home. I have biological rights, Jessica countered. And considering the current environment you're providing, police reports, protective orders against grandmothers, federal investigations, tearing the family apart, a judge is going to be very interested in an alternative. You live in a condo in Tampa with a guy who sells jet skis, I said, remembering the last piece of information I'd managed to scrape together years ago. You can't provide an alternative, Jessica smiled. It was a thin, terrible smile. I'm not taking her to Tampa, David. I'm staying here. Philip and Sarah graciously offered me their guest house in La Douai. We're setting up a bedroom for Eloise. A stable, two-parent, wealthy household with her biological mother present in the best school district in the state. The sheer scale of their manipulation crashed over me. They weren't just fighting me. They were building a fortress. Philip and Sarah knew the child abandonment charge made them look monsters to the family court. But if they brought Jessica in, if they housed her, funded her, and presented a united front of a reformed biological mother supported by a wealthy aunt and uncle, they could paint me as the isolated, unstable, vindictive father standing in the way of a perfect family unit. You're a prop, I said, staring at her in disgust. He's using you to stay out of prison, and you're letting him do it to your own kid. I'm securing her future, Jessica said, dropping the wrapped box onto the bottom step of the porch. I'll see you on Monday, David. Tell Eloise her mommy misses her. She turned around, walked back to the town car, and slid into the back seat. The car pulled away, leaving nothing but the sound of wet tires and the small silver box sitting on the wet concrete. I walked down the steps, picked up the box, and walked around to the side of the house. I opened the lid of the heavy plastic trash can and dropped it inside, listening to it thud against a bag of coffee grounds. When I went back inside, my phone was ringing. It was Marcus. "I just got off the phone with the Guardian ad litem," Marcus said, his voice heavy. "Her name is Sterling. She's tough, David, by the book, and she just informed me that Jessica Miller's legal counsel has formally filed for a modification of the original custody agreement, citing a material change in your mental fitness." "She was just here," I said numbly. "Jessica. She was standing on my porch. She's living in Philip's guest house." Marcus cursed softly under his breath. "They're pooling their resources. Philip is laundering his custody bid through her. If Jessica gets primary custody, she immediately signs a delegation of care to Sarah and Philip. It's a loophole, David. It bypasses the abandonment charge against Philip, because technically, the mother is the one taking custody. Can they do that? They're trying. And with the social worker's report still pending, and your mother's lies muddying the waters, the judge might look at Jessica as a viable option if she can prove she's rehabilitated and has financial backing." "She hasn't paid child support in 7 years," I said. "Isn't that illegal?" "It's arrears," Marcus corrected. "It's a debt, not a felony. And I guarantee you, Philip's lawyers are drafting a check right now to clear that debt, so she looks clean for the judge on Monday." I leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing my face. Every time I blocked a punch, they threw 2 more. They had infinite money, infinite malice, and absolutely no moral bottom. "What do we do, Marcus?" "Monday is in 2 days. We go after the money," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "The federal freeze on the estate stopped your mother from moving assets, but Philip is still bleeding cash from somewhere to pay for Jessica's lawyers and her flights. If he's using funds from that federal courthouse project to finance a custody battle, the FBI won't wait for an audit. They'll execute a warrant. How do we prove that?" "We don't," Marcus said. "Sarah does." I blinked, confused. "Sarah is paying for Jessica's lawyers?" "Sarah is the financial officer for Philip's LLC," Marcus explained. "She signs the checks. I looked up the corporate filings yesterday. If Philip is moving dirty money to Jessica, Sarah's signature is on the wire transfers. She's not just a witness to the child abandonment anymore. She's an active participant in federal wire fraud. She'll never flip on him," I said. "She hates me. She hates you," Marcus agreed. "But she loves her country club, her house, and her freedom. If she realizes Philip is about to drag her into a federal indictment that carries a 10-year mandatory minimum, her loyalty to a failing marriage is going to evaporate very quickly. So how do we make her realize it?" "You're going to have to talk to her," Marcus said, "face to face, without Philip around. You need to show her exactly what the blast radius of this federal investigation looks like, and you need to offer her a way out." "You want me to extort my sister-in-law?" "I want you to survive, David," Marcus said coldly. "They brought your ex-wife back from the dead to take your kid. The gloves are off. I can find out where Sarah is going to be tomorrow, but you have to be the one to drop the hammer." I didn't let myself hesitate. I knew Sarah's Saturday routine. Every week, she spent her morning at a high-end yoga studio in Frontenac before heading to a bistro nearby for a salad that cost more than my daughter's shoes. It was the kind of life built on the assumption that nothing would ever truly go wrong as long as the checks cleared. I parked my beat-up truck 3 blocks away and waited. When I saw her white Lexus pull into the lot, I felt a surge of nausea, but I forced it down. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward her. She saw me when she was halfway to the studio door, her yoga mat slung over her shoulder. She stopped dead, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered loathing. "You have a lot of nerve," she said, her voice trembling. "After what you've done to Philip, after what you've done to his mother. I'm not here for Philip, Sarah. I'm here for you. I have nothing to say to you. My lawyer." "Your lawyer is being paid by Philip's LLC," I interrupted, keeping my voice low and level. "The same LLC that's currently being audited by the federal government for padding hours on a $45 million courthouse project. Every check Philip has written lately, including the ones for your lawyer, and the ones for Jessica's flights, and the ones for her legal team, is being tracked. And since you're the one who signs those checks, Sarah, you're the one they're going to name as a co-conspirator." She went still. The arrogance didn't vanish, but it flickered. "That's a lie." Philip said it was just a paperwork error. "It's wire fraud, and because it involves a federal contract, it carries a 10-year mandatory minimum. Philip is going down, Sarah. He's already underwater. But you can still walk away. If you testify about what happened the night at the rest stop, if you tell the truth about the white Lexus and how Philip planned to leave Eloise there, the DA will give you immunity. And if you give the federal auditors the access they need to the LLC's books, you stay out of a jumpsuit." She stared at me, her chest heaving. I could see the gears turning. She wasn't a loyal soldier. She was a survivor. She looked at her Lexus, then back at me. "If I do this, he loses everything. He already lost everything the second he drove away from my daughter in the rain," I said. "The only question is whether he takes you with him." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back to see if she believed me. I knew the seed was planted. Monday morning was the reckoning. The Guardian ad litem's office was a cramped, sterile room on the top floor of the courthouse. Miss Sterling sat at the head of the table, her face as cold as a St. Louis winter. Jessica was there, sitting next to Philip and Vance. Philip looked smug. He actually had the audacity to wink at me when I sat down. He thought he'd won. He thought Jessica was his ace in the hole. But Sarah wasn't there. Vance looked at his watch, whispering to Philip. I saw the first crack in Philip's composure when the door opened, and it wasn't Sarah who walked in, but a man in a dark suit with an ID badge clipped to his belt. He walked straight to Miss Sterling and handed her a thick packet of documents. "I'm Special Agent Miller with the Office of the Inspector General," he said. "We've just completed an emergency review of Miller Architecture's financial records. Based on a voluntary disclosure provided by the firm's CFO, Sarah Miller, we are moving forward with a series of indictments." Philip stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "What? Sarah? Where is she?" "She's currently in a secure location providing a sworn statement," the agent said, "regarding both the financial irregularities and the events of last Friday night on Route 63. The room exploded. Vance started shouting about due process. Jessica looked like she wanted to bolt for the door, but Miss Sterling just tapped her pen on the table, a sharp, rhythmic sound that cut through the noise. "Sit down, Mr. Miller," she said. Her voice wasn't just cold, it was lethal. She looked at the documents the agent had provided, then at the affidavit from Jessica. She picked up Jessica's statement and slowly, deliberately, ripped it in half. "Mr. Vance," she said, "I suggest you advise your client to find a criminal defense attorney immediately. As for you, Miss Miller," she looked at Jessica, who looked like she was about to be sick, "I will be recommending to the court that your parental rights be formally terminated for cause. You accepted payment to facilitate the intimidation of your own child. You're lucky the state isn't filing charges against you as well." Philip was being led out by the agent for questioning. He didn't look like an architect anymore. He looked like a small, broken man who had finally realized that family loyalty only works when you treat your family like humans instead of pawns. I walked out of that building an hour later. The rain had finally stopped, and the sun was breaking through the gray clouds over Clayton. My mother was waiting by the elevators. She looked older, her face lined with a grief she had brought on herself. "David," she whispered, reaching out a hand. "Please, he's your brother. We can still fix this." I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I walked right past her, the silence between us final and absolute. When I got home, Eloise was waiting on the porch. She wasn't lining up her toys. She was standing at the railing, watching a butterfly land on a leaf. When she saw my truck, she didn't freeze. She ran down the steps, her hair flying behind her. I caught her and swung her around, holding her so tight I could feel her heart beating against mine. "Is it over?" she asked into my shoulder. "It's over, Elle," I said. "It's just us now, and that's all we ever needed." We went inside and I started making dinner. Mac and cheese, the way she likes it. The house was quiet, but for the first time in a week, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace. I looked at my daughter, who was finally, slowly, starting to smile again, and I knew that whatever else happened, I had done the one thing I was supposed to do. I had brought her home.